Hi, guys. Welcome to the Right Review. I'm Nola Nash, clearly not Annie McDonald. Annie is having some health issues tonight, so we're wishing her very well. But I am so excited to be able to step into her shoes. Very, very big shoes to fill, so bear with me, guys. As you guys know, I am the host of the Second Line show, and so I'm very excited to be talking to Stacie Murphy, who's also going to be on the Second Line later this year. So go ahead and be posting those comments and questions for us as we go. You guys know that I will do my best to get to some of those as we can. If you've not given StreamYard permission to use your Facebook profile, then drop your name in your comments so we can address those who are here by their names, because we like to know who's here. And we've got some folks already coming in. B says hello. So hi. Hi, B. And we've got Catherine's here, Alicia's here, lots of folks dropping in. Thanks so much for joining us today. I want to introduce you to, let me get that banner off of here, hang on, because I'm going to see names and stuff. I want to introduce you to Stacie Murphy, who I have read the synopsis for her book, and guys, this book is good. I can't wait to read the whole thing. Stacie, I'm going to let you tell the folks a little bit about yourself, just who you are, what you write, anything that you'd like to share.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I love doing these. This is so much fun. I'm Stacie Murphy. I'm the author of A Deadly Fortune, which just came out from Pegasus Crime on January 5th. It is my debut novel. It is the story of Amelia Matthew, who is a young orphan in Gilded Age, New York City. She has a very mild psychic gift that she's mostly a con artist. She has used it. It kicks in once in a while and she uses it when it does, but she's mostly a fake. She sustains a head injury, and when she wakes up, she has vastly expanded abilities, and unable to control them, she accidentally channels a ghost in public and winds up in the Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum, which was the city asylum of New York City for indigent patients in the late 1800s. And she's trapped there until she solves a mystery to earn her way free. And like I said, it's my first novel. I love historical fiction, and I love historical mysteries specifically. I love that gilded Victorian age. It's my favorite time to read. And so when I started trying to think about what I wanted to write, it was really a matter of just mashing together. Like, I made a list of elements that I enjoy in fiction, and I mashed them together and came up with the idea for this book. I'm originally from the Nashville, Tennessee area, technically White House, Tennessee. Nola and I were talking. She actually has been to White House, Tennessee. Nobody has ever been to White House, Tennessee. Nobody's heard of it. I never run into anybody who's heard of it. I live now outside of Washington, D.C. with my husband and my 5-year-old daughter. My day job is as a lobbyist for a progressive nonprofit working on global reproductive rights issues. And I started writing A Deadly Fortune in 2017 because my professional life was very stressful in the immediate aftermath of November 2016. And I was literally on Twitter one night. My bio says I started writing the book to keep myself off of Twitter, and that's literally very true. I was on Twitter one night in March of 2017, and I felt my blood pressure pounding in my temples over something. I don't even remember what it was now. And I literally had this moment of, I'm going to have a stroke if I don't come up with something else to think about for the next 2 years. I need something else to do. And I'd always wanted to write a novel and had never done it. And so I didn't even have a laptop. I borrowed my husband's laptop and I started typing. And that was how A Deadly Fortune came to be.
I love that. I love that story. And you have the worst cat in the world. Is that what you said on your bio too?
Actually, the worst cat left us a couple of weeks ago, but it was sort of too late to change the bio. It was already in print or getting printed. He was 20 years old, so he had a long life of tormenting me and making my life miserable. And by that designation, he was the worst. But he did pass on a couple of months ago. So.
Oh. Well, I'm so sad to hear that, but I'm glad the torment is over.
We're bearing up. We're bearing up under our feet.
Bearing up fine. Some other folks that I would love for you to get to know. We've got some great folks here tonight joining us. Robert Gwaltney, Y'all, if you don't know Robert Gwaltney, you will when this Cater Tree comes out. Talk about beautiful lyrical writing. He is incredible. Georgiana Cross is here. Georgina, hello, hello. But lots of folks that are definitely intrigued by your synopsis there. And we have a librarian who also loves Gilded Age romance and mystery, who's looking forward to reading the book. So we authors love librarians. We absolutely do. So thank you so much for all that you do for promoting books in libraries. So awesome, awesome job. I love these folks. Everyone is sad about your terrible cat dying. That's also
I can talk more about why you shouldn't be, but you would think I was cold-hearted, and it would take up much time. He was really, really bad.
Oh.
He don't think for 20 years. So.
Oh my goodness. Yes. 20 years. He had a good long
life. Good long life.
And I'm sure he was, spoiled rotten, I'm sure, for all 20 of those years and earned all of that. They would like to know, and that's a great question, especially when we wanted to talk about research, and somebody who writes historical fiction research is near and dear to my heart. And when I get asked this question, what types of genre do you like to read? It's also often nonfiction because that's my research. If I'm working on something, just about everything that I am reading is nonfiction. And it's very hard for me to step away into fiction when I've got a project going. If I'm working on a book, I have a hard time reading fiction because, one, there's no time. And then two, I don't want to get muddied with other people's storylines and things in my head, but there's a lot of different genres that I like. So are there some that you like, or is it kind of just you're kind of hung up in your research like I get sometimes?
No, actually, I do read nonfiction for research, but not to the exclusion of fiction. I'm a fiction reader. Nonfiction, generally, if I'm going to read it, it has to read like a novel. So like the narrative type, I get into that, but I'm mostly a fiction reader. Obviously, mystery, historical. I love sci-fi and fantasy. I read really, really pretty widely. I'm a genre person. I'm not a big literary fan. I like plot. I like, if it's literary, it still needs to, again, sort of read like genre. I'm usually not that interested. If I would have read it in school, I probably won't read it for fun. I read really widely. The only, I will say that when I was writing A Deadly Fortune, I tried to actually stay away from Gilded Age or Victorian, like not read any new stories set around then while I was trying to write, because I was doing a thing where I didn't accidentally want things to seep in. Like I didn't want to accidentally steal anything.
That's why I don't read fiction while I'm researching and trying to write too. It's that same thing. It's like I don't want to accidentally,
or I don't want to accidentally do that, and I also don't want to feel like I'm comparing myself. If I read something really good, then I will get intimidated, and it's hard enough to keep going. Not having done it before and diving in to a novel first thing. I hadn't written fiction before I started trying to write this, and so. I jumped in and I was like, oh, I'm in the deep end here. So I was flailing around, I didn't know how to write a novel. And so I definitely didn't want to be comparing myself in my messy draft that everything was out of order and I didn't know what was happening. And I didn't want to be mentally comparing myself to completed work. So.
I like that. And I think a lot of authors feel that same way. I don't know how many of us verbalize that, but it is absolutely, if we're doing real talk here, that is a thing that, it's hard not to compare yourself to what it is that you're reading. And then, you start to lose.
Messy early draft to the published thing. You have to really remember that it's, this is supposed to suck, this first draft that I'm working on. It's not supposed to be polished. And I have a tendency remembering that. So,
yeah. Me too. I'm really hard on myself. I love that honesty. That.
Why isn't this coming out the way I want it the first time?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's like you think that most people Plus, they're really kind of thinking about the writing process. You know, if you pull a book off of a bookstore shelf, and you think, oh, this is what they wrote. Well, that might be what they wrote for the, 100th time that they got to this.
But their hands on the keys.
Yeah, this is not what they sat down and just wrote the first time. Robert's got a great question, and I do want to talk to you about some of your research with the Gilded Age, but kind of to lead us into that, aside from the research, do you have any rituals that connect you to the time and the characters that you are writing? Any way that you connect to them outside of the actual research world?
I don't know if I would call them rituals, but I certainly spent a lot of time thinking about the characters. What do their lives look like outside of the book? Part of the research for me that's not actually maybe technically as important to writing the book, but it's really important for me to feel immersed in the place, is that I look at maps, especially old photographs of those areas. And New York is great for that because there's so much history there. And there are so many databases. There's like the New York Public Library, I think, system it's basically Google Maps, but old photos of Manhattan. So they took a map and they took all of the old photos back to the 1800s and they pinpointed where all of them are. And so you can go and click.
That's very cool.
And see the photograph with the date of what was on that corner at that time. And that's hugely helpful for me because I really, really needed a sense of geography. And I'm not super familiar with New York myself. And so I really needed that sense of geography and understand the orientation, where things were. How would you get from here to there? That kind of thing. So I spent a lot of time looking at old photos and clicking around on that map also just because it was cool. And the fun things about being a historical author is like, I'm totally wasting time looking at stuff that I think is cool, but it's research. So it's fun. I might use this somewhere eventually. I have jotted down a note about it. So therefore I haven't been procrastinating. I have been researching.
There's a note. It must be work.
It counts. It definitely counts.
Absolutely counts.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I have used those rabbit trails in some other project. And so I can go back and go, this is worthwhile. This is absolutely worthwhile.
And for me, it's definitely, there have been several times where it's been like, I'm having a plot knot that I haven't worked out. Well, what was around there that might be cool to incorporate? What was happening around that time? What kind of external thing might I be able to pull in? And I found all kinds of neat little tidbits that I was able to pull in. And I want A Deadly Fortune to be the start of a series. I'm not under contract for book 2 yet, knock wood. But I very much hope that the publisher will decide they want the second one. And so I have a half draft of a second one. And I found the plot for the second one while researching the area where the first one is set.
I love it when that happens.
That's a really cool story. I could build that in to book 2. So, I mean, I found the plot of book 2 while researching just a trivial thing for book 1. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, Stacie wants to know, she's asked, are you a fan of The Alienist?
Yes, hugely so. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It was enormous piece of inspiration for A Deadly Fortune. I wanted to write something in that vein, and I pitched it as, for fans of The Alienist, this is a good, I wanted it to be a little less gory, and I wanted it to be more female focused. I wanted a female main character. And I wanted it to be clearly a series. And but yes, The Alienist, I adore that book. I have not actually watched the TV version because I don't want to be disappointed. It always makes me angry. I'm never happy with the TV or the movie version. So I've not actually watched the TV version, but I've read The Alienist probably 10 times.
There you go, Stacie. You got it. Fan of The Alienist. We got it out there. And she'd asked a couple of times, I've got to get to it. I know. She's got a good answer for this one, I know. Now, The Gilded Age and the Insane Asylum. I'm assuming that because of the time period, it made the mystery in the Insane Asylum that much more intricate. They didn't have necessarily the same ways to communicate. They didn't have the same reasons for being put in an insane asylum. The fact that there even is an insane asylum, all of that, The Gilded Age is a great time period to work with because of what was available and what was not available for solving this type of mystery. Is the Gilded Age something that you were loving to start with, or did it have more to do with what you wanted to accomplish in the mystery around the insane asylum? I guess which one of those two things kind of were the launch pad for the writing?
So the Gilded Age came first, that time period being what I wanted to do. And so the list of things that I wanted to incorporate when I was making that list of elements that I love, that time period, a strong female character, a found family. So she's an orphan. She has a foster brother, but she has no blood ties to anybody. So I wanted that really strong non-blood relationship. And I wanted that relationship to be really important in the book. And I wanted, there were just all of those elements. And then I started thinking about, well, what do I enjoy? And also that little hint of something supernatural. Mm-hmm. I love that. And I love paranormal fiction, but I did want this to be very much grounded in the real world. I wanted it to have a slightly eerie, otherworldly aspect, but just a touch. I didn't want it to be a parallel world or a different world or a world where psychic phenomena was common. So these characters are just as baffled by all of this as we would be. So I really wanted it to have the feel of our world.
Yeah, I like that though. I like it when the characters are as confused by the gifts as you would expect them to be.
Right.
For me, it makes it more realistic. It's easier to suspend your disbelief when that's the case. And when you have a real setting in a real place and a time period people are familiar with, and you add that little spark of something paranormal and without overdoing it, then it seems as though it can happen. Why wouldn't that happen? Everything else is real. Why isn't this? This could be.
One of the things that's pleased me most about the reception of the book so far is that I've seen several reviewers say, I didn't know about this whole paranormal thing. I was really not sure how I was going to feel about that. I thought I might not like it, but I actually really liked it. And that says to me that I hit the mark that I was aiming for, that it was believable. It was otherworldly, but still believable. I had brought in enough to make it fun without jing people's ability to go along with it. So I've been really pleased by that. And the insane asylum, I wish that I could remember the exact moment when I started bringing things in. But I was already familiar. I'd read Nellie Bly's, Elizabeth Jane Cochran was the reporter. She went undercover. So all of the experiences that happen in the asylum, barring the paranormal bits, are taken from history. They are real. Blackwell's Asylum was a real place. The conditions there were horrific. There was overcrowding, terrible food, overworked doctors, nurses who didn't care. It was very bleak. It was a very terrible place to be. And there were plenty of women there who were not insane by any definition. They were just unwanted. There wasn't anywhere else to put them. And so I had read Nellie Bly's expose. It's called 10 Days in a Madhouse. She was a reporter who was sort of one of the first female investigative journalists. And she actually had heard the rumors about the terrible conditions there. And so she got herself committed. She got herself committed to the asylum for 10 days. And her editor finally came and bailed her out. And she wrote this expose that ended up, it was a big scandal. It ended up getting the asylum's budget like doubled the following year because the conditions that she found were so deplorable. And so I already was aware of her, and I thought, well, so I've got a psychic, and I've got a psychic who's newly overwhelmed by powers. So that seems like a logical place for her to wind up. She doesn't have powerful friends. She doesn't have her own money. Like, this seems like a natural sort of consequence of her new abilities. So I started reading then. I went back and I read 10 Days in a Madhouse, and I looked at old pictures of the asylum, and I was like, this is actually a really cool, spooky, interesting place. And the fact of it being on an island, it's not in Manhattan proper. You have to take a ferry to get there. There's a bridge now, but back in the day, the fact of it being separate, there's one point where Amelia is on the island and she's looking across at the Manhattan skyline, and it might as well be on the moon. She can't get it. It's there and she can see it, but she can't get to it. And so the alienation and the separateness of the place was far more interesting because it was on an island than it would have been just out in the countryside or somewhere.
I think that's why we get fascinated with things like Alcatraz, because it's
Yeah.
so close and yet so very far away and so isolated.
It's a whole other self-contained world that is not connected to what's happening in the outside. Yeah.
And yet they can see it. You know, if
Right,
they look
yeah,
up
right there.
see
You could almost get there, but you can't.
And that's almost more torturous than if you were completely secluded from anything and everything. You could start to almost imagine that there is no outside world. But if you can see it and see what, your sanity and especially if you're there accidentally or by force, like so many women were at that time, then, it's so close and yet you cannot get to it. And if you weren't crazy before, after some time, that they absolutely start really messing with your brain.
And that's the sort of treatment that women who were there experienced. I mean, this was not a forward-leaning time in terms of psychological understanding or psychological treatment or the understanding of mental illness. And so treatments were things like cold soaks and then being wrapped in wet sheets and put in a cold room. And that was supposed to shock you out of melancholy. They're
out of melancholy and into pneumonia.
Yes. Hard to,
One problem leads to another. And I mean, there was absolutely.
Nola, you're freezing for me just a little. I can't.
Hang on. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Oh, there's loose connection there somewhere. But I mean, there were so many horrors inside of an insane asylum. I love how you focused on certain people. There were women there that they were all there for the same reason, but it's not clear at first what that reason is. And that is kind of where our mystery starts to unfold, is why are these women here that maybe don't fit what we normally think of as a lunatic? And then how do we backtrack to how they got here in the first place? And then what do we do about it? And I like that it's Amelia and her psychic ability that actually kind of kicks all of this off in a way. I mean, if she had not had that knock on the head, then one, she wouldn't have been there to help these people, but two, she wouldn't have necessarily been able to pick up on that anyway, since she was kind of a con artist. So having her work with these particular women that were in there for a very different reason, how did you find that angle? Was that news stories? Was that just kind of the things that you read about in the other research?
Sure. Realizing that there were very clearly going to be women there who didn't belong there, I started thinking about, where could I build a mystery in there? And Amelia meets, in the hospital, she meets Andrew Kavanaugh, who is a doctor originally from Philadelphia, who has experienced a personal tragedy and decided that he wants to rededicate his career to the study and treatment of mental illness, especially in women. And so he has taken a position at the asylum. And an old college friend of his comes to him and says, "My sister is missing. We have reason to think that she's at the asylum." And he says, "Well, that can't possibly be true because this asylum is for indigent women. It's a city service for the indigent. So your sister has a well-to-do husband. She couldn't be there." And he explains, the friend explains why he thinks that his sister is there. And Andrew says, okay. He's humoring him. I'll look. And he stumbles across evidence that the friend may be right. And he doesn't really have any way of going about finding her until he runs into Amelia and realizes that her gift is real. And so she wants out, and he desperately wants to find this sister of his friend. And so he strikes a bargain with her, and he says, "You have to help me solve this mystery, and then I'll help you escape." And so there are these cross-cutting motives there.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Yes.
Yeah. And we'll help each other out.
And nobody's fully altruistic. I mean, Amelia doesn't come in crusading to get these women free.
Right.
she's always been self-focused and she's always been self-absorbed because she's had to be to survive. And doing things just out of the goodness of her heart is not something that she's ever had the luxury of doing. And so she needs that little nudge to get involved and try to solve this mystery. And she does become more focused on the injustice of it as the book progresses. So I
don't want to give, I don't want to give anything away too much about the book, but I love the lengths that the foster brother will go to help her. That relationship is very, very interesting, and what he is willing to do to help not a blood relative, but that relationship, that bond is so close because they've only ever had each other.
Yes,
that he's willing to.
I meant that to be so the foster brother's name is Jonas, and he's gay, and so I wanted it to be. I did that intentionally because I wanted it to be very, very clear. There's no blood relationship, and that this is an intimate relationship, but that it's never going to be a sexual or a romantic relationship. That's not ever going to be where that is, and that this relationship is as intense or more so than if it were blood. And and I mean for it to be a little, maybe even unhealthy, maybe a little codependent, because they all had each other, and he's always looked out for her, and he's slightly older, and he's stronger, and he's charming, and he's brilliant, and she has always leaned on him because he's always been there. And so looking at that relationship, I mean for it to have its nuances as well. But it was very, very important to me that bond be unmistakable and be solid.
I think it is. I can't wait to read the whole book. I've read the synopsis, and I'm trying really hard not to give anything away, y'all, because it's really good. Oh my God, even knowing the full synopsis and I know how it ends, I still want to go and read it. It's like, now I want to see how it all plays out, like really plays out. It is a fascinating story. It is a fascinating time period. The Gilded Age is gilded. I mean, we think about the Gilded Age, and yet what you're dealing with here is not necessarily the opulence that we would think. This is kind of turning that on its head. This is finding the grittier side, the darker side of the Gilded Age. And I love that you've chosen to explore that side of it as well, and kind of putting those two things, because we have the wealthy women and they're the men who have put them there, and then that grittier side of that insane asylum, but also what Amelia and Jonas do for a living, and how do they make ends meet? And it's not bright and shiny either. I mean, they are scraping by and doing things that people wouldn't necessarily think of as part of the Gilded Age when you look at that time period.
Yeah, and with a strong implication. I mean, I don't go into just a ton of their backstory in the book, but with a strong implication that this, like, they have scraped and clawed to get where they are, and where they're pretty good. They are working at a fairly Tony nightclub, where wealthy people congregate and gamble and drink, and Amelia tells fortunes, and Jonas works as a bouncer and a sometime prostitute. And he's enough at the peak of his game that he gets to be pretty picky about his clientele, but he's they're still one bad knock away from the streets, which is where they came from. And so they are very much comfortable rubbing shoulders with wealthier, higher class people. They've learned how to sort of ape those manners, but they don't come from that world. And so they are very, very much aware of being separate from that world, that they are there on sufferance. And I think even with her tenuous position in society, I wanted to show how much Amelia, being in control of her own destiny, she's better off than a wealthy married woman in ways, because she is free. And being wealthy didn't necessarily protect you if you were a woman who had a husband or a father who wouldn't look after you. You didn't have a lot of economic or social power necessarily. And that was definitely something. And I, another thing, like multiple people have called it a feminist historical mystery. And I was like, well, yeah, but I didn't actually set out, again, I didn't actually set out to write that, but I guess I'm the fish in that ocean. So that was going to come no matter what.
Yeah. But I like that bent of, we think Gilded Age and it's going to be beautiful and it's going to be opulent and it's going to be all of this. But in order for that opulence to happen, there were people who had to work to do that for the people who could afford that
Absolutely.
lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And so using that time period and framing it in the way that you did is a very interesting lens to view all of this through. And I think a very necessary one for all of the reasons that you just said about how tenuous their position actually is and how easy it is for her to get into that insane asylum you put there. Also how difficult it is for her to be taken out again. I mean, it's not like she's got somebody who's just going to show up and go, well, our bad, sorry, we're going to take her home now. So, I mean, that was not something that was going to happen for her. And so her struggle then becomes very, very real. And it's largely her struggle because, I mean, she has to find her own way to deal with all of this, like you said. And it's a great premise for a book. And I just want to say congratulations on your debut. Heck of a debut coming out. And guys, if you have not read this book, like I have not read this book, but you are listening to this, I guarantee you, I know where a whole lot of our mice, these things are going to start clicking. Okay. Amazon, it's available on Amazon, anywhere else.
And all bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, you can get it from Walmart or Target online. And shameless self-promotion, it did get a starred review from Publishers Weekly. So that was a big deal on the day.
A big deal. Shout that from the rooftops. Yes, ma'am. Self-promote that. Absolutely. So Stacie's giving away a copy of her book. So Annie is going to randomly choose on random.org, and she will announce the winner later on. So keep an eye out on the Right Review for that. And Stacie, tell everybody where you can be found in the world of the internet.
I'm all over the internet. I'm on Facebook, Stacie Murphy, author. I have a personal page, but I also have an author page. Not to be offended, if you friend me on my personal page, I will direct you to the author page because I don't add people I don't know on my personal page, but I will be thrilled to have you on my author page. I'm on Insta at Stacie.Murphy. I'm on Twitter at Stacie M Writes, and it's STACIE M Writes. And I do have a website, staciemurphy.com.
Awesome. Well, Stacie, thank you so much for joining us on the Right Review today. And I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation in August. But don't be a stranger until then. Let's connect as well, because I love
doing book clubs. So if you have a book club, reach out. I love join, and I will zoom in for enough of the discussion for you to feel like you've gotten to talk to me, and then I'll leave in plenty of time for you to talk about the parts that you don't like, so you don't have to do it in front of me.
So she will talk with you, and then you can talk about her.
Talk about me. Right, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed it. And, if you get a chance, go back through some of the comments. I know we didn't get to everybody, but the reception has been quite good. So
good.
Check it, folks. Great chat with you today, Stacie. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Right Review. And guys, we're wishing Annie all the best, and she will be back with you soon. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining us.